The words didn't just hurt, they felt like a physical blow, a cold blade sinking into 32 years of loyalty. You are replaceable. Do not forget that, Dad said. He didn't even look up. He just pushed a loan application across the table, asking for more money than he'd ever requested before. The sheer, naked greed in his voice made my skin crawl. Mom, Rosalind, stood right next to him. She let out a short, dry laugh, like what he said was just common sense. "It's the truth, Wanda. Don't be so sensitive." I'm Wanda Barnes. I'm 32, and I work in financial risk management. In my world, everything has a price and a measured return. For years, I've been the one covering their emergencies, paying their overdue bills, and filling the gaps they refuse to handle themselves. I've lived independently and paid my own way, but in this family, that independence became a trap. I became their personal bank. I looked at them. They treated my support like a birthright, and me like a product they could withdraw from whenever they wanted. I didn't argue. I just thought about the numbers. I paid for the apartment they were sitting in. I held the lease on the truck Dad drove. I carried the insurance for Wally, Jerome, Misty, and Felicia. I paid the phone plans. They used those benefits every day because they thought my income was there to fix their mistakes. If I'm replaceable, I said, my voice steady, then the benefits attached to my name are replaceable too. I stood up to leave. Tammy, my chow chow, got up with me. She didn't make a sound, but she moved between me and the table, her thick fur brushing against my leg. She's the only one in this house who doesn't see me as a paycheck. "Where are you going?" Mom asked, her laugh dying out. "To handle some business," I told her. I walked toward the door with Tammy right at my side. Dad thought he was holding all the cards, but he forgot whose name was on the contracts. If value is denied in finance, the investment ends. I realized then that the most expensive thing I ever owned was my family's approval, and the price was my soul. They wanted me to be a ghost in my own life, but they forgot that ghosts can haunt the very houses they built. Tammy trotted beside me, her weight a grounding force, and as I reached for my keys, I knew that the bank of Wanda Barnes was officially closed for business. Before I go on, what time is it for you? Where are you? And which city are you watching from? I want to know how far this story has traveled. What would you do if someone treated you like a replaceable bank account? Let me know in the comments below.
The next morning, I didn't go into the office. I took a personal day, sat down at my kitchen table with a large coffee, and opened my laptop. Tammy laid across my feet, her heavy weight grounding me as I logged into my banking portal. It felt cold to treat my family like a risk assessment, but Dad's voice was still ringing in my head. Replaceable. If I was just a utility, it was time to turn off the power. I started with the credit cards. Mom and Dad each had a card under my account for emergencies that had turned into daily grocery runs and department store trips. Jerome and Misty had secondary cards too, which they used for gas and subscriptions. I didn't call them, I didn't send a warning text, I just went to the management page and clicked deactivate for every card that didn't have my name on it. Next, I looked at the joint checking account. I was the only one depositing money into it, but they were the only ones spending it. There was $1,200 left in there. I transferred the entire balance to my private savings and left the account sitting at zero. Then came the phone plan. I called the carrier. "I need to separate the lines on my family plan," I told the representative. "Keep mine active. For the other 5, they'll need to establish their own contracts and credit checks." "That will significantly increase their individual rates, Miss Barnes," the agent warned. "I'm aware," I said. By noon, I had scheduled the insurance removals for Wally and Felicia's cars. I felt a strange sense of relief, not anger. I was just following a compliance checklist. I was returning the responsibility to the people who actually owned it. I closed my laptop and looked at Tammy. She tilted her head, watching me. For years, I believed I was obligated to subsidize their lives because they called it loyalty. I realized now that loyalty was just the word they used to describe my dependency. I spent 32 years trying to buy a seat at a table that only wanted my wallet. But as the confirmation emails began to hit my inbox, I realized that when you stop paying for a toxic environment, you don't just save money, you save yourself. The silence was broken 2 days later. I was sitting in my living room, checking a risk report for work, when the first wave of messages hit. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Mom. She didn't call, she preferred the distance of a text when she wanted to complain. She said she was at the checkout at the grocery store and her card had been declined. She asked if there was a glitch in the system and told me to fix it immediately because the cashier was looking at her. I didn't panic. I didn't apologize. I typed back a short sentence. The card is inactive. You'll need to use your own funds. The typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, and then a paragraph arrived. She said food was a basic need and that I was poisoning the family bond over a bank error. I didn't respond. Then Jerome called. He was at a gas station. He was angry, his voice rising as he told me he couldn't get home because the pump rejected his payment. He said I was turning my back on family cooperation. Cooperation requires 2 people, Jerome, I said, leaning back as Tammy rested her chin on my knee. Right now, it's just me paying and you driving. That's not a partnership. I hung up. By the evening, Dad finally called. He didn't ask questions. He went straight to the attack. He said I was humiliating them. He told me that other daughters would be proud to support their parents and that my behavior was morally defective. You told me I was replaceable, Dad. I'm just taking your advice. I've replaced the version of me that pays for everything with the version that doesn't. The line went quiet for a few seconds. I could hear his heavy breathing. He didn't have an argument for his own words, so he just threatened to come to my office to talk to my supervisors about the kind of person they hired. I petted Tammy's soft ears. I wasn't scared. I worked in finance. I knew that threats were usually a sign of a weak hand. I told him that contacting my workplace would be a legal issue, not a family one, and ended the call. The financial bridge was gone. Now we were finally going to see who they were when they had to stand on their own. The threats didn't stop at the phone calls. By Thursday, the administrative corrections I'd made started hitting the rest of the group. Wally was the first to show up at my place. He didn't knock, he pounded on the door. Tammy was up in a second, standing between me and the entrance, her low, muffled huff telling me she wasn't happy about the noise. I opened the door just a crack. "The insurance company sent me a notice, Wanda," Wally snapped. He looked disheveled, like he'd actually had to think about his own logistics for once. "My car isn't covered. If I get pulled over, I'm done. You can't just pull the plug without a warning." "The warning was the 10 years I spent paying it," I said. "You have a job, Wally. Call an agent and get your own policy." "With what credit?" he yelled. "I don't have a score because you've always handled the accounts." It was the ultimate irony. By helping them, I had allowed them to remain financial ghosts. But it wasn't my job to haunt the banks for him anymore. I closed the door while he was still talking. That night, Misty and Felicia sent a joint message. They were losing their streaming services and the shared cloud storage where they kept all their photos. They called me petty and power-hungry. It was amazing how quickly they turned to insults when the free coffee ran out. I sat on the floor with Tammy, brushing out her coat. The house was quiet. No one calling to ask me to transfer $50 or cover the light bill. For the first time in a long time, the money in my account stayed there. But I knew the biggest hurdle was still ahead. The lease on the apartment Mom and Dad lived in was up for renewal in 30 days. I was the guarantor. If I didn't sign, they didn't have a roof. I looked at the renewal email on my phone. The delete button was right there. I wasn't feeling vengeful. I just felt tired of carrying people who wouldn't even walk beside me. The leasing office called me on Friday morning. They were polite, professional, and completely indifferent to family drama. They just wanted to know if I was renewing the guarantee for Mom and Dad's apartment. "I'm not," I said. "I'd like to be removed as the guarantor immediately." The agent explained that without my signature, the current occupants would have to undergo a full credit and income screening to stay. I knew they'd fail both. An hour later, the emergency visit happened. Mom, Dad, and Kyle didn't call this time, they just drove over. I saw them through the window and felt a momentary pit in my stomach, but Tammy was already at the door, her solid presence leaning against my leg. I let them in, but I didn't offer them a seat. "The office says you're refusing to sign the lease, Wanda," Dad started. He tried to sound commanding, but I could see the sweat on his forehead. "You're going to put your own parents on the street?" "No," I said. "I'm giving you the opportunity to pay for the roof over your heads. That's not a punishment, it's a lifestyle change." Mom started crying, the quiet, practiced kind of sobbing meant to make me feel like a monster. "We've always been there for you, Wanda. This is how you repay us, by making us homeless?" "I've paid for this place for 3 years," I reminded her. "If you can't afford it, you find a place you can afford. That's how the world works." Kyle stepped forward, trying to play the mediator. "Look, just sign for 1 more year. It'll give us time to get on our feet. Don't be so dramatic." "I'm a risk manager, Kyle," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "Giving a 1-year guarantee to people who haven't paid a bill in a decade isn't a favor. It's a bad investment, and I'm done investing." They didn't have an answer for that. Dad muttered something about me being cold-blooded, and they walked out. As the door shut, I didn't feel the guilt they were trying to shove on me. I felt light. I looked down at Tammy. She was wagging her tail, waiting for her walk. "Let's go, girl," I said. "We've got our own life to live." Monday morning back at the office was a test of focus. I spent the day staring at spreadsheets, but my phone was a minefield. I had blocked the main numbers, but new ones kept popping up. Distant cousins and family friends calling to tell me how much I was hurting Mom. I ignored them all. When I got home, the house was dark, but Tammy greeted me with her usual enthusiastic hop. I checked the mail. Tucked between a flyer and a utility bill was a formal notice from the leasing office. Since I hadn't renewed as the guarantor, a notice to vacate had been issued to the occupants. They had 30 days. I sat on the floor, leaning my back against the sofa. Tammy sat right in front of me, her thick golden fur soft under my hand. I felt the weight of that 30-day clock. It wasn't just a move, it was the total collapse of the fantasy they'd lived in. My phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Dad. No threats, no shouting, just a list of numbers, their total debt, the cost of moving, and a final request for $5,000 to get them into a motel while they searched for a new place. I looked at the number. $5,000. It was the exact amount I had planned to spend on a new security system and some upgrades for the house. For a second, the old Wanda, the one who fixed everything, wanted to open the banking app. I felt the pull of the habit. But then I remembered Dad's face when he told me I was replaceable. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted a fallback plan. I didn't reply to the email. Instead, I looked up the local social services office and sent him a link to the county housing assistance program. "I'm not the bank anymore, Tammy," I whispered. The next move was theirs. They could either fill out the forms or find another person to drain. But as I watched Tammy chew on her favorite rope toy, I knew one thing for sure. The person they were looking for didn't live here anymore. The silence lasted for about 3 days before the guilt committee changed tactics. I was leaving the office, walking toward the parking garage, when I saw Mom and Felicia standing by my car. They didn't look angry, they looked fragile. "Wanda, please,"
Mom said as I approached. She didn't have her designer bag today. She looked older, more tired. We've started packing, but the motel costs $100 a night. We can't keep we can't keep ourselves in a place like that. She looked at my Chow Chow, who was sitting in the back seat of my car, watching them through the glass. Tammy didn't bark, but she kept her eyes locked on Felicia, who was busy texting on a phone I knew was about to be cut off. I sent you the link for the subsidized housing, Mom, I said, reaching for my door handle. Did you call them? They said there's a waiting list, Felicia snapped, finally looking up. We need a place now. Dad is staying with a friend, but Jerome and I have nowhere to go. You have a spare room. No, I said. The word was easy. I have a home. You have a situation you created by refusing to save a dime for 10 years. My guest room isn't a shelter for people who called me replaceable. It was just a heat of the moment thing, Mom cried, grabbing my sleeve. Your father didn't mean it. I gently pulled my arm away. He meant it enough to say it while asking for a loan. He saw me as a transaction, and now the transaction is closed. I got into the car. Tammy moved to the front seat, her heavy head resting on the center console. As I backed out of the space, I saw them in the rearview mirror. Two women who had never had to worry about a bill in their lives, now realizing that no one was coming to rescue them. When I got home, I didn't check my messages. I took Tammy for a long walk. We passed a local park, and I watched her sniff the grass, completely unbothered by the storm I'd walked out of. I wasn't just managing risk anymore. I was finally enjoying the assets I'd worked so hard to build.
By the second week of the move-out notice, the pressure moved from emotional to desperate. I found out through a mutual contact that Wally had been forced to sell his luxury watch just to cover a deposit on a storage unit. Hearing it didn't give me the satisfaction I thought it would. It just felt like watching a slow-motion collision I had predicted years ago. I was in the kitchen preparing Tammy's dinner when my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. It was Jerome. He sounded breathless. "Wanda, the power is out," he said. No hello, no apology. "The account wasn't closed, Jerome," I said, measured. "I just transferred it out of my name. I sent everyone the login info to take over the billing 3 weeks ago. Did any of you look at it?" "We thought you were just bluffing," he muttered. "How are we supposed to pay the reconnection fee and the deposit? They want $500 up front because our credit is shot." "That sounds like a question for the person who decided not to pay the bill," I replied. I heard a crash in the background and then Dad's voice yelling at Jerome to hang up. I didn't wait for more. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the counter. Tammy looked up from her bowl, her ears twitching at the tension in my voice, but she went back to eating once I patted her head. The reality was setting in for them. A life built on someone else's labor is a house of cards, and the wind had finally picked up. That night, for the first time, I didn't feel like checking the banking app to see if I could spare the $500. I sat on the balcony with Tammy, watching the city lights. I realized that for 32 years, I had been carrying the weight of 6 other people's lives on my shoulders. Without that weight, I felt like I could finally breathe. They weren't in the dark because I was cruel. They were in the dark because they refused to buy a candle. The move-out deadline was 5 days away. I spent my Saturday morning at a local coffee shop, working on a freelance consulting project. Tammy was tucked under the small bistro table, her tail occasionally thumping against the floor when someone walked by. My phone lit up with a notification from my home security app. Someone was at my front door. I pulled up the camera feed and saw Misty. She wasn't yelling. She was just sitting on my porch steps, looking at her hands. I finished my coffee, packed up, and drove home. When I pulled into the driveway, she didn't move. I let Tammy out of the car first. The Chow Chow walked up to Misty, sniffed her shoes, and then sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "I found a job," Misty said without looking up. "It's a retail position. The pay is half of what I'm used to spending in a week. It's a start, I said, standing by the car. I had to give them a bank statement for the direct deposit, she continued, her voice cracking. I realized I didn't even know how to open a solo account. I've been an authorized user on your life for so long that I don't exist to the bank. You exist now, I told her. The paperwork is the hard part. The rest is just showing up. She looked at me then, her eyes red. Dad is staying in a motel that smells like cigarettes. He's blaming you for everything. He says you robbed him of his retirement. But Wanda, I saw the bills on the table before the power went out. I saw how much you were paying every month. I didn't say anything. I didn't need her to thank me, and I didn't need her to defend me. I can't help them, Wanda, she whispered. I can barely help myself. That's how it's supposed to be. You take care of you, they take care of them, and I take care of me. She stood up, wiped her face, and walked toward her car, the one I had stopped insuring. She'd managed to get a temporary policy. It was expensive and the coverage was basic, but it was hers. As she drove away, I realized the family was splintering. The shared greed that held them together was dissolving under the pressure of individual survival. I walked inside, Tammy following close behind. The house was quiet, and for the first time, it didn't feel like the silence before a storm. It just felt like peace.
The day the movers arrived at Mom and Dad's place, I wasn't there to watch. I didn't need the visual. I received a notification from the leasing office at 10 a.m. confirming the keys had been returned. My legal tie to their housing was officially severed. I was at the dog park with Tammy, watching her move through the grass with that slow, dignified chow-chow trot. My phone rang. It was Felicia. "We're at the storage unit," she said. She sounded exhausted. "Dad is refusing to help unload. He says his back hurts, but really he's just staring at the highway. Jerome left an hour ago to go stay with a friend 3 towns over. It's just me and Mom, Wanda. We can't move the sofa." I suggested, "Call a local hauling service." I threw a ball for Tammy. She looked at it, decided it wasn't worth the effort, and went back to sniffing a shrub. "With what money?" Felicia snapped. "We spent the last of the cash on the truck rental." "Then you'll have to leave the sofa," I said, "or wait until Dad decides that sitting on the floor of a motel is worse than helping you move." "You're really just going to let us struggle?" "I'm letting you experience the results of your choices," I corrected her. "You all decided that my income was a communal resource. Now you're learning that a resource has a limit. If the sofa is too heavy, that's a physical reality. My paycheck isn't a lever you can use to move it anymore." I hung up before she could start the next round of guilt. I looked at Tammy. She had found a patch of sunlight and was leaning her head back, enjoying the warmth. She didn't have any complicated expectations. She just wanted to be near me. By evening, I saw a post on social media from Rosalind. It was a photo of a sunset with a caption about finding strength in betrayal. I didn't feel the sting I usually felt when she played the victim. I just felt like a stranger looking at a badly written script. They were in a motel, Jerome was gone, and the furniture was scattered. The replaceable daughter was sitting in a quiet house with a dog who actually liked her, and for the first time in my life, my bank account wasn't bleeding out.
2 weeks later, the silence from the motel was replaced by a different kind of noise. It wasn't shouting anymore. It was the sound of reality setting in. I was at the pet supply store picking up a specific green-free kibble for Tammy when I saw Dad. He didn't see me. He was standing in the aisle of a neighboring grocery store, staring at a box of generic cereal like it was a complex math problem. He looked smaller. The expensive tailored jacket he used to wear was wrinkled, and he was holding a handheld basket instead of a cart. I watched him for a second. He checked the price tag, put the box back, and picked up a smaller bag of oats. He was calculating cost. For the first time in his life, he was doing the risk management I'd been doing for him for a decade. I didn't approach him. I paid for Tammy's food and walked to my car. When I got home, I found a letter in my mailbox. It wasn't a bill or a legal notice. It was a handwritten note from Jerome. He told me he'd found a job working warehouse shifts. He said he was exhausted and his hands were constantly sore, but he'd managed to pay for his own phone plan that morning. He didn't ask for money. He just wrote, "I didn't realize how much a gallon of milk actually cost until I had to trade 3 hours of my life for it." I sat on the porch with the letter in my hand. Tammy sat beside me, her thick tail thumping against the wood. The family structure hadn't just changed, it had been demolished and rebuilt. They weren't a unit anymore because the bank that funded the unit had closed its doors. They were just individuals now, forced to interact with the world on the world's terms. Mom called that night. Her voice was quiet. She told me she'd started working as a part-time receptionist at a local clinic. She didn't complain about her blood pressure. She didn't call me selfish. She just asked if I had a good recipe for something cheap that could be made in a slow cooker. "I'll email you a few," I said. We talked for 5 minutes. We didn't talk about loyalty or tradition or the past. We talked about groceries. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. 6 months passed. The transition from the help to an independent woman was finally complete. My house felt like mine, my time felt like mine, and my money stayed where I put it. I spent my Saturday morning in the backyard. The grass was thick, and the air was finally cooling down. I was sitting on the patio with a coffee, watching Tammy. She had developed a habit of patrolling the perimeter of the fence, her golden fur glowing in the sunlight, before coming back to flop down at my feet. She looked healthier, more relaxed. I think dogs pick up on the lack of tension in a house. Dad called around noon. He didn't sound like the man who had stood in my living room and told me I was replaceable. He sounded like a man who had worked a 40-hour week and was looking forward to Sunday. He told me he'd moved into a small studio closer to his new job. "It's not much," he said, his voice scratchy, "but I paid the security deposit myself. No cosigner." "That's good, Dad," I said. I didn't praise him like a child. I acknowledged it like a peer. He didn't ask for a loan. He didn't mention a single bill. He asked how Tammy was doing and told me to be careful driving in the rain. Before he hung up, there was a long pause. He didn't apologize, he wasn't that kind of man, but he said, "I think I understand what you meant about the numbers now, Wanda." I hung up and looked at my chow chow. The revenge wasn't a big explosion or a dramatic courtroom scene. It was the simple, quiet act of walking away and letting the world teach them what I couldn't. I wasn't the bank, I wasn't the fallback. I was Wanda Barnes, a woman who knew exactly what her life was worth. I stood up, grabbed a leash, and Tammy was at the door in a heartbeat, her tail wagging. We walked out of the house and down the street, moving at our own pace. For the first time in 32 years, I wasn't carrying anyone's weight but my own, and it felt light.